Lady Caroline Hayes did not see him at first. She saw only Henry's mittened hand in hers, the gray New York snow drifting over the harbor, and the basket of bread pressed against her hip as if ordinary things might still save a life from memory. Then, the street went still. Across the whitewashed road, a tall gentleman had stopped as though struck through the heart. Dark coat, black hat in one hand, gloves pale against the storm. He looked less like a man than a verdict delivered too late, and when his gaze fell upon the child at her side, power shifted all at once. The Duke of Moreland had crossed an ocean to find the woman he had banished, and now he was looking at the boy who bore his face. Henry tugged at her fingers. "Mama?" Caroline could not answer. For one terrible instant, all the years between London and New York vanished. The damp American air became the candlelit breath of English ballrooms. The snow became the glitter of chandeliers, and she was no longer a respectable widow on a modest street near the harbor, but a foolish young woman again, standing too close to a duke who had once looked at her as though restraint itself were pain. Jonathan Croft did not move, neither did she. Only Henry, innocent and warm beside her, shifted closer beneath his little wool cloak and peered up at the stranger with open curiosity. The child's dark hair curled at the temples despite the cold. His eyes were green, Croft green. No woman who had ever stood before the Duke of Moreland in a London drawing room could have mistaken them. Caroline's pulse began to hammer. She had always known this day might come. Not because Jonathan had written. He had not. Not because repentance was natural to proud men. It was not. But because the past, once tied to rank and title, did not remain buried merely because a woman crossed the Atlantic and taught herself silence. 3 months earlier, Lady Whitmore's letter had arrived with its perfumed seal and poisonous little line. "The Duke of Moreland is searching for an American woman. They say there is a child." Caroline had burned the letter in her grate. The paper blackened. The words did not. Now here he was, the man who had once drawn her into shadowed galleries after midnight concerts, the man who had stood too near her beneath the winter roses at Moreland House, the man who had kissed her with reverence, then dismissed her with a solicitor's letter so cold she had thought for one dreadful hour she might die of humiliation before the ship even sailed. "You do not belong here. You never did." He had not written those exact words, yet every line had contained them. Henry pointed through the falling snow. "Mama, is that gentleman looking at us?" At last Jonathan moved, only one step, then another. His cane struck the stones with a sharp sound. Caroline saw, with a kind of savage satisfaction, that his hand was not steady. Neither was his face. The Duke, she remembered, had always been carved from composure, his voice low, his posture immaculate, his emotions hidden as carefully as family, silver. Now he looked as though grief had taken a knife to every polished surface and left the man beneath exposed. "Caroline," he said. Her name on his lips felt like an old wound opening. She drew Henry a little behind her. "Do not come nearer." Jonathan stopped at once. Snow gathered on the shoulders of his greatcoat. He looked at Henry again, and she watched the exact moment knowledge became certainty. His breath caught. The color left his face. He did not ask. Of course he did not. Some truths are too mercilessly visible for questions. Henry, puzzled by the silence, stared up at him. "Sir, do you know my mama?" No one spoke. Caroline could hear harbor bells in the distance, the creak of wagon wheels, the muffled gossip of passers-by slowing without quite daring to stare openly. Even in New York, ruin wore a recognizable expression. Jonathan removed his gloves with fingers that seemed suddenly clumsy. He looked not at her first, but at the child. "Your name?" he asked, voice uneven. Henry stood straighter, as though instinct had placed pride into his little bones before birth. "Henry Hayes, sir." The Duke closed his eyes. Only for a moment. When he opened them again, something terrible and tender had entered them both. Caroline knew then that whatever rumors, letters, or whispered suspicions had driven him across the sea, this was the first instant he truly understood what he had cast away. Not merely her. His son. Jonathan took one more step, then stopped himself as though the effort cost blood. "He is mine." It was not triumph. It was devastation. Caroline lifted her chin. The old humiliation rose in her like fire, clean and merciless. "He is my son." Jonathan looked at her then, fully, and whatever apology had sailed with him from England could not survive the sight of her face. She had changed. She knew she had. London's softness had been burned away by work, childbirth, fear, and survival. There was no rich widow to shield her now. No grand townhouse, no polished assembly rooms, no pretty illusions. Only Bowery Street, sewing by lamplight, lessons given to merchant daughters, bills counted carefully. And Henry, always Henry. Still, Jonathan stared as though she were the only fixed thing in a collapsing world. "Caroline," he said again, lower now. "I did not know." The words nearly made her laugh, not with amusement, with disbelief sharpened into cruelty. "You did not wish to know." Henry looked from one to the other, sensing at last that this was no common meeting. His small hand clutched her skirts. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Please." That one word was dangerous, because she had once loved him enough to hear pleading where no one else would have heard anything but command. Caroline gathered every ragged piece of herself and stepped back toward the milliner's door. "If you possess even a fragment of the honor you once wore so well in public," she said, "you will leave us in peace." But Jonathan Croft did not look like a man prepared to leave. He looked like a man who had just found the very life he had condemned to exile. And as Henry's green eyes lifted once more to his father's face, Caroline knew the storm she had crossed an ocean to escape had only just reached her shore. Jonathan did not follow them inside. That, more than anything, unsettled Caroline. She had expected pursuit, aristocratic insistence, the old, polished authority of a man accustomed to doors opening because he had merely approached them. Instead, when she drew Henry through the milliner's entrance and shut out the snow, she saw through the narrow pane that he remained in the street, motionless beneath the whitening sky, as though punishment had at last found him, and he meant to stand still beneath it. Mrs. Gladys looked up from a hat brim trimmed in winter ribbon. Her sharp old eyes missed very little. "Who is that gentleman?" she asked. "No one," Caroline said too quickly. Henry twisted in her grasp. "He knew me, Mama." Caroline bent to unfasten his damp cloak. "No, darling. He knew of you." It was a foolish distinction. One a child would not understand. One a mother scarcely understood herself. All evening the shop felt too small for her thoughts. Below, Mrs. Gladys received ladies with careful smiles and quicker judgments. Above, in the narrow rooms Caroline rented, the kettle hissed on the stove, while Henry played with his wooden soldiers upon the rug, inventing battles no one truly lost. "Was he from England?" he asked at supper. The spoon slipped in her hand. "Yes." "Did you know him there?" Caroline looked at her son's face in the candlelight and saw too much of Jonathan in the line of his brow. "Once." Henry considered that with solemn attention. He looked sad. Children were cruelly gifted in such matters. Later, when Henry slept, Caroline stood at the window in her plain nightdress and parted the curtain with 2 trembling fingers. He was still there. Not in the center of the street now, but across from the milliner's shop beneath the iron glow of a gas lamp. Snow silvered his shoulders. His head was bowed. One gloved hand rested over the top of his cane, and there was something in the rigid line of him that was worse than pride. Remorse. At last, as though feeling her gaze through glass and storm, Jonathan lifted his face toward the window. Even across that distance, Caroline felt it. Recognition, longing, regret sharpened by wonder. Then, with the slow heaviness of a man carrying his own ruin, the Duke of Moreland turned and walked away into the New York night. And Caroline, watching him go, discovered that hatred was far simpler at sea than it was at arm's length. The following morning, Caroline rose before dawn. Sleep had not come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him in the snow, no longer the untouchable Duke of Moreland, but a man standing still as though awaiting judgment. It unsettled her more than anger ever could. Anger was clean. This was not. Henry stirred as she tied her hair into a severe knot. "Mama, I am here," she said softly, crossing to him. "Will the sad gentleman come back today?" Her hand paused over his blanket. "I do not know." But even as she said it, something in her already knew. He would. Men like Jonathan Croft did not cross oceans for silence. He came before noon. The bell below chimed once, sharp and unmistakable. Caroline froze at the small writing table where she had been mending a client's gloves. Her needle hovered midair. Mrs. Gladys's voice carried upward. "State your business, sir." A pause. Then, "I have come to speak with Mrs. Hayes." The title struck like a stone dropped into still water. Mrs. Hayes, respectable, proper, safe. A name he had never spoken before. Caroline rose slowly and descended the narrow staircase. Jonathan stood inside the shop now, hat removed, snow melting along the dark wool of his coat. He seemed too large for the space, too carefully composed, and yet not composed at all. His eyes found her at once. Everything else fell away. "Caroline," he said. She did not invite warmth into her expression. "You were told to leave." "I was," he replied quietly, "and I did." Mrs. Gladys looked between them with open suspicion. "You have 5 minutes, sir. No more." Jonathan inclined his head with the instinctive grace of a man born to be obeyed, yet there was no command in it now, only gratitude. Caroline stepped toward the back of the shop. "Speak then." He followed, stopping at a respectful distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid across 4 long years. At last, Jonathan drew a breath. "I came to New York because I was told there might be a child." Her spine stiffened. "You were told correctly." His gaze flickered. Pain, relief, something dangerously close to awe. "Why did you not tell me?" The question might once have broken her. Now it sharpened her. "Because you sent me away," she said evenly. "Because you made it very clear that I was an inconvenience to be erased." His jaw tightened. "I was trying to protect yourself," she cut in. The word landed cleanly. Jonathan did not deny it. That, more than any excuse, struck her. He lowered his eyes briefly, then forced himself to meet her gaze again. "Yes." The honesty unsettled her. "I was a coward," he continued. voice low. I thought distance would end it. That what we felt, what I felt, would fade if I removed you from my life. Carolyn's fingers curled into her skirts. And did it? No. The answer came without hesitation. It hung between them. Dangerous in its simplicity. I tried, he went on, quieter now. I returned to Moorland House. I attended Parliament. I fulfilled every duty expected of me. And still... He stopped, as though the words themselves resisted dignity. Still you were there. In every room. In every silence. Caroline looked away. She had lived that same haunting, but without estates to distract her. Only long nights, a growing child, and the memory of a man who had chosen pride over her. You do not get to speak of suffering, she said, not loudly, but with precision. Not to me. I know, he said. Again, no defense, only acceptance. It disarmed her more than argument ever could. A pause. Then, I learned of Henry 6 months ago, Jonathan said carefully. From my sister. Caroline's gaze snapped back to him. Lady Abigail? She is dead. The words fell quietly. Caroline inhaled sharply. She died of fever, he continued. But before she did, she told me. She said I had not lost only you. His voice faltered. I had lost my child. Silence flooded the small room. Even Mrs. Gladys, hovering at a distance, pretended not to listen. Caroline felt something shift. Inside her, not forgiveness, not yet, but the first fracture in the wall she had built so carefully around her heart. He is 3 years old, she said at last. He knows nothing of you. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. That is my doing. Yes. A beat. Then softer, against her own intention. He is kind, she added. And curious. He likes horses he has never seen, and stories of knights who do not abandon those they claim to protect. Jonathan's breath caught. It was a small cruelty. She had meant it to be. Yet when she saw the way it struck him, deep, undeniable, something in her wavered. I would like to know him, he said after a moment. Not as a duke, not as a claim, only, his voice roughened, only as his father, if you will allow it. Caroline's first instinct was refusal. Immediate. Absolute. But then she thought of Henry's voice at breakfast. He looked sad. She hated that it mattered. She hated that Henry's world, so carefully constructed, so fiercely protected, might now be divided between truth and silence. You do not deserve him, she said. I know. And you will not take him from me. Never. And you will not speak of England, of titles, of inheritance. Jonathan hesitated. Only for a second. Then, as you wish. Caroline studied him, really studied him. The perfect duke was still there in posture, in bearing, but something had shifted beneath it. Something quieter, more dangerous, something real. 15 minutes, she said finally. His breath stilled. You may see him, she continued. Here, with me present. You will say nothing that confuses him. You will not claim anything that is not yours to claim. Jonathan's voice was barely more than a whisper. Thank you. Do not thank me, she replied. I am doing this for him. She turned toward the stairs, then paused, without looking back. He is upstairs. And for the first time since stepping onto American soil, Jonathan Croft, Duke of Moorland, feared and untouchable, felt something dangerously close to hope. Jonathan did not move at once. For a man who had commanded estates, servants, and entire rooms with a glance, the narrow staircase before him seemed a far greater trial, Caroline noticed. Of course she did.
Have you forgotten how to walk? She asked coolly.
No, he said, voice low. Only how to deserve what waits above. She turned without replying. That too unsettled her. The room upstairs was small, too small for memory, too small for everything that had once passed between them in candlelit halls and hidden gardens. A narrow bed, a worn rug, a single window clouded by winter frost. And in the corner, Henry. He sat cross-legged upon the floor, arranging his wooden soldiers into careful lines. His dark head bent in concentration, lips moving faintly as he narrated a battle only he could see. Jonathan stopped in the doorway. Something inside him broke quietly, irreparably. This was not a distant rumor, not a whispered scandal, not a consequence to be negotiated or contained. This was his son. Alive, real, small enough to be held. And he had not been there. Caroline watched him from the side. She saw the shift, the way his shoulders lowered, not in defeat, but in surrender to something larger than pride. The way his breath altered, as though he feared even that might disturb the fragile miracle before him. For the first time in all the years she had known him, he did not look like a duke. He looked like a man who had lost everything and only just realized what that meant. Henry glanced up. He blinked once, then smiled open and bright. The sad gentleman came back. Jonathan's lips parted, but no sound came. Caroline stepped forward. Henry, this is... She stopped. What was he? A stranger? A mistake? A truth she had hidden? Jonathan seemed to understand the hesitation. He stepped inside slowly and removed his gloves as though entering something sacred. You may call me Mr. Croft, he said gently. Henry tilted his head. Are you from England? I am. I knew it, Henry said with satisfaction. You look like the people in Mama's books. A flicker of something, pain softened by wonder, crossed Jonathan's face. Do I? Yes, like knights. Caroline closed her eyes briefly. Of all the cruel little ironies, Jonathan managed a faint smile. I am afraid I have never been much of a knight. Henry considered this very seriously. You look like one. Silence followed. Then Jonathan crouched, slowly, carefully, bringing himself level with the child. Caroline's breath caught. She remembered that posture. He had once knelt before her in a moonlit garden, not in supplication, but in intimacy, in trust, in something that had felt dangerously like forever. Now he knelt for their son. May I sit with you? He asked. Henry nodded immediately and pushed a soldier toward him. You can be this one, he's the captain. Jonathan took the small wooden figure as though it were made of glass. Thank you. They sat together on the worn rug. Caroline remained standing, watching, always watching. What does the captain do? Jonathan asked. He protects everyone, Henry said, even when it's dangerous. Jonathan's hand tightened slightly around the figure. And does he succeed? Yes, Henry said firmly, because he's brave. Jonathan looked down. Something in his expression faltered. I see, he murmured. They played in silence for a few moments. Henry moved the soldiers with bold imagination. Jonathan followed, slower, uncertain, but attentive, listening, learning. As though memorizing something he had no right to forget again. Then, do you have a father, sir? Henry asked suddenly. Caroline stiffened. Jonathan did not look at her. Yes, he said quietly, I did. Was he a knight too? No. A faint pause. But he believed he was. Henry frowned, unsatisfied with that answer, then returned to his game.
Caroline exhaled slowly.
Jonathan's restraint did not go unnoticed. He had not claimed. He had not rushed. He had not taken what was not yet his, and somehow that unsettled her more than arrogance ever could. After a time, Henry leaned closer to Jonathan, studying him with open curiosity. You look like me, he said. The room went still. Caroline's heart stopped. Jonathan's breath did too. Yes, he said after a moment, voice almost breaking. I believe I do. Henry seemed pleased by this discovery. Mama says I got my eyes from someone far away. Jonathan swallowed. I imagine that is true. Caroline turned away. It was too much. Too close. Too dangerous. Because this quiet, careful tenderness was not the man who had sent her away with money and silence. This was someone else. Or perhaps this was the man he had been too afraid to be. The clock on the wall ticked. Loud now. Relentless. Caroline stepped forward. Time is nearly finished. Henry looked up immediately. Already? Jonathan did not move. Not yet, as though he were trying to commit every detail to memory. The curve of the boy's cheek, the sound of his voice, the small unguarded trust in his eyes. At last, slowly, he set the wooden captain down. Thank you for allowing me to play, he said. Henry smiled. Will you come again? The question hung in the air. Jonathan looked at Caroline. She met his gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, if I am permitted, he said carefully. Henry turned to her. Mama? Caroline's throat tightened. This was the moment. The line. The beginning of something she could not easily end. Yes, she said at last, perhaps. Henry beamed. Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, just once, then rose. When he stood, the room seemed too small again. Too fragile to hold everything that had just shifted within it. At the door he paused. Caroline, he said quietly. She did not step closer. Yes? I will not fail him again. Her expression did not soften. You already have. The words were not cruel. They were true. Jonathan accepted them with a slight incline of his head. Then he left. The door closed. Silence returned. Henry picked up his wooden captain and resumed his game as though nothing monumental had occurred. Caroline stood in the center of the room, still, unmoving, because something had changed. Not forgiveness, not trust, but something far more dangerous. Hope, and she did not know yet whether it would save her, or destroy her all over again. The next Thursday, he arrived precisely at 2. Caroline had told herself she would not notice. She noticed the exact moment the bell rang below. The way her hand stilled over the mending in her lap. The way Henry abandoned his wooden soldiers with a shout of delight and ran for the stairs before she could call him back. Henry, walk, she said sharply. But he was already halfway down, laughter echoing. Caroline rose more slowly. She had chosen this. She reminded herself of that with every step. Jonathan stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, coat brushed free of snow. He looked different, still composed, still unmistakably aristocratic, but something in him had softened. Or perhaps it had simply been stripped bare. Mr. Croft! Henry flung himself toward him without hesitation. Jonathan caught him instinctively, not with awkwardness this time. With certainty. Caroline felt it like a physical blow. That ease. That belonging. Good afternoon, Henry, Jonathan said, voice warmer than she had ever heard it in London. You came back, Henry declared, as though this were the greatest miracle in the world. I said I would try. You did. Caroline stepped forward. 2 hours. Jonathan inclined his head. As you wish. No argument. No push. No reminder of who he had once been, and again, that unsettled her. Upstairs, the small room seemed less suffocating than before, or perhaps she had simply grown used to the way he filled it. Jonathan removed his gloves and set them aside carefully, as though mindful not to intrude upon anything that was not freely given. I brought something, he said. Caroline's gaze sharpened. You were told— It is not extravagant, he interrupted gently. He unwrapped a small parcel. Inside lay a thin, well-worn book. Henry's eyes widened. Stories. Knights, Jonathan said, and horses. Henry gasped as though handed treasure. Caroline said nothing, but she did not stop it. That too was a kind of permission. They sat together on the floor again. Closer this time. Easier. Henry curled between them, the book open across his lap. You read? He demanded, handing it to Jonathan. Jonathan hesitated only a fraction, then began. His voice was low, steady, shaped by years of formal speech, yet softened now by something quieter, something real. Caroline tried not to listen. She failed, because she remembered that voice. In ballrooms, in gardens, in the dark when he had spoken her name like something precious. Now he read to their son, and every word felt like a thread pulling her back toward a life she had buried. The night rode through the storm, Jonathan read, though all warned him to turn back. Why didn't he? Henry interrupted. Jonathan paused. Then softly, because someone he loved was waiting on the other side. Caroline's needle slipped. A sharp sting. A bead of blood. She did not react. But Jonathan's eyes flicked to her hand at once. Concern immediate, unguarded. Are you hurt? It is nothing. The words came too quickly, too defensive. Jonathan looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded, and returned to the story. Time moved strangely. Too fast, too slow. Caroline remained in her chair, mending, watching without appearing to watch. She saw everything. The way Henry leaned against Jonathan as though he had always belonged there. The way Jonathan adjusted his posture instinctively to support him. The way his hand, large, careful, rested lightly against the child's back as though afraid the moment might vanish if held too tightly. It should have angered her. Instead, it hurt. Because this was what she had imagined once. Before the letter. Before the ship. Before she learned how quietly a heart could break. Did the night find her? Henry asked. Jonathan did not answer at once. Caroline's breath stilled. He is still trying, Jonathan said finally. Why? Because he was foolish, he replied. And he must prove he can be brave. Henry considered this. Then, with absolute certainty, she should forgive him. Caroline's head snapped up. Jonathan's gaze lifted, met hers. For one suspended moment, nothing existed but that look. Too much history. Too much truth. Too much that could not be undone. Perhaps, Jonathan said quietly. The clock struck 4. Caroline stood at once. It is time. Henry groaned. No! It is time, she repeated. Firm. Unyielding. Jonathan closed the book. Carefully. As though ending something fragile. He set it aside and rose. Henry clung to him. Will you come again? Jonathan did not answer immediately. He looked at Caroline. Always her. Always the final word. She felt it. The weight of it. I will consider it, she said. Jonathan inclined his head. Then I shall hope. Henry smiled, satisfied. At the door, Jonathan paused. Caroline. She did not step closer. Yes? His voice lowered. Not for Henry. For her. I meant what I said. She stiffened. You have said many things. In the story, he clarified. Her breath caught. That a man may learn to be brave, he continued, even if it is late. Caroline held his gaze. You were not late, she said quietly. You chose not to come at all. The words landed. True. Unforgiving. Jonathan accepted them, as he always did now. Then softer. I am here now, and for one dangerous fleeting second. She almost believed him. Good day, Mr. Croft, she said instead. The distance returned. Like armor, like survival, he bowed his head. And left. That night after Henry slept, Caroline sat alone. The room felt different, fuller, unsteady. Her fingers traced the spine of the book he had brought. She should have sent it back. She did not. Instead, she opened it and found, tucked between the pages, a pressed English rose, faded, fragile, still holding its shape after years. Her breath faltered, because she remembered that rose. A garden, a night, a promise he had never spoken, but she had believed. Caroline closed the book at once. Too fast, too hard, as though it might burn her. Because the most dangerous thing was not that he had returned. It was that somewhere beneath all her anger, her heart had not forgotten him at all. The rain began before noon. Not a gentle spring rain, but a relentless wind-driven storm that turned the narrow streets into rivers of gray water and rattled the window panes as though the city itself objected to what was coming. Caroline stood by the window, arms folded. He would not come. No reasonable man would. She told herself that twice. Then a third time. Henry, seated on the floor with his wooden horse, or storm, looked up. "Will Mr. Croft still visit?" "No," she said too quickly, "not in weather like this." Henry's small face fell, though he tried to hide it. "Oh," Caroline turned away. Better this way. Better that Henry learn early. Men leave, storms come, and promises, no matter how carefully spoken, do not hold against either. At precisely 2:00, the bell rang. Caroline's breath caught. Once. Sharp. Impossible. Henry leapt to his feet. He came. Caroline did not move at once. She forced herself to walk, slow, controlled, down the narrow stairs. Mrs. Gladys had already opened the door. And there he was. Jonathan Croft stood drenched to the bone. His coat clung to him, darkened by rain. His hair, unpowdered and disordered, fell slightly across his brow. Water dripped from the brim of his hat onto the worn floor. But his posture, still straight, still deliberate, as though he would not permit even the storm to diminish the dignity he had once used as a shield. "I apologize for the state I'm in," he said quietly, "but I said I would come." Caroline stared at him. Something inside her shifted, sharp and sudden. "You will ruin the floors," Mrs. Gladys snapped, though not without a hint of reluctant approval. "Get inside before you freeze where you stand." Jonathan stepped in. Water pooled beneath him. Henry ran forward without hesitation. "You came in the storm." Jonathan's expression softened at once. "I gave my word." Caroline's throat tightened. He had once given her his word too. But this felt different. Or perhaps she was simply more dangerous now. Upstairs the room felt warmer than usual. Or perhaps it was the storm pressing so fiercely against the glass that everything within seemed close, contained, inescapable. "You cannot sit there like that," Caroline said more sharply than intended. "You will fall ill." Jonathan removed his coat with difficulty. "I will not take up much space. That is not the concern." She disappeared briefly and returned with a folded cloth and a plain shirt. "Change," she said, placing them on the chair. "I will not have Henry catching pneumonia because you wished to prove a point." Jonathan looked at the shirt, then at her. Something unspoken passed between them. "Thank you," he said. He did not argue. He did not question. He simply obeyed. And again, that unsettled her. When he returned, sleeves rolled, hair still damp. Caroline looked away too quickly. He seemed closer now. Less distant. Less untouchable. More human. Henry had already arranged the book. "Story." Jonathan sat beside him without hesitation. This time, when he read, he did not stumble. He did not hesitate. His voice filled the small room with quiet certainty, even as thunder rolled beyond the walls. Caroline sat in her chair sewing, or pretending to, because she was watching, always watching. The way Henry leaned against him, the way Jonathan's hand rested lightly over the child's shoulder, the way he bent his head slightly to hear every word, every interruption, every small joy. This was not performance. It could not be. No man sustained such gentleness for hours merely to deceive. And that realization terrified her. A crack of thunder shook the room. Henry startled, then laughed. "It sounds like cannons." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Only the sky making noise." "I'm not afraid," Henry declared. Jonathan glanced at him. "I know." A pause. Then, "I am." Henry blinked. "You?" Jonathan nodded. "Sometimes." "Of what?" Jonathan's gaze lifted. "At Caroline's. Forgetting what matters most," he said quietly. The words landed. Heavy, unavoidable. Caroline's breath faltered. The hours slipped away too quickly, too easily, and that more than anything felt dangerous. Because ease had once been the beginning of her undoing. At last the clock struck 4. Caroline stood. It is time. Henry clung tighter. But it's still raining. Jonathan rose slowly. I will return next week, he said. Not a question. A promise. Caroline hesitated, only a moment. But long enough to matter. Yes, she said. Soft, uncertain, real. At the door, the storm had lessened. Only slightly. Jonathan reached for his coat. Caroline stepped forward. Wait. He stilled. She held out his gloves. Their fingers brushed. Just once. Barely. But it was enough. The world narrowed to that single point of contact. Warm. Familiar. Dangerous. Caroline pulled her hand back as though burned. Jonathan's breath unsteadied. Neither spoke, because neither trusted what might follow. At last he took the gloves. Thank you, he said. For the gloves. For the hour. For everything she had not yet taken back. Caroline opened the door. You should not walk in this weather again, she said, not looking at him. I will walk wherever I must, he replied quietly. For him? A pause. Then, for both of you. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. No, she said at once, do not mistake this. Jonathan did not move. You are here for Henry, she continued, voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. Nothing more. He inclined his head. I understand. But his eyes said something else entirely. And that was precisely the problem. After he left, Caroline closed the door slowly, leaning her back against it. Breathing, trying to steady something that refused to be still, because the truth had begun to press in on her. Relentless as the storm outside, he was not the same man. And she was no longer certain she was the same woman who could walk away. The following Thursday, he did not come. At first, Caroline did not allow herself to notice. The clock struck 2. She continued sewing. Henry sat by the window. Storm clutched tightly in his small hands. He will come, the boy said, more to himself than to her. Caroline said nothing. 2:15. 2:30. The light shifted across the floor. Still no knock. Still no sound of the bell below. Henry's voice grew quieter. Maybe the storm came back. Caroline's throat tightened. Perhaps. 3 o'clock. The silence became unbearable. Henry turned to her at last, eyes too wide, too careful. Did he forget me? The question broke something cleanly inside her. No, she said, crossing to him at once. No, he would not. But the words faltered. Because once he had forgotten her, and that memory was cruel enough to bleed into the present. Henry lowered his gaze, small fingers gripping the wooden horse. He said he would try. Caroline pulled him into her arms. He did try. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. Slow, poisonous, familiar. 3 days passed. No letter. No message. No explanation. Caroline told herself she had expected this, that men like Jonathan Croft did not change. That consistency was merely another form of performance, and she had been foolish to believe otherwise. Henry stopped asking. That was worse. On the 4th day, a knock came. Not confident, not measured, tentative. Caroline opened the door. A man stood there, plainly dressed, hat in hand. Mrs. Hayes? Yes. I carry a message from His Grace, the Duke of Moreland. Her pulse dropped. Where is he? St. Vincent's Hospital, ma'am. The world tilted. He took ill, the man continued. Pneumonia, they say. He has been there several days. Only today was he able to write. He handed her the letter. Caroline's fingers trembled as she took it. She did not remember climbing the stairs, only that she sat, opened the seal, and read. If you never wish to see me again, I will understand. Only allow me to say goodbye properly. He deserves that. The paper blurred. Caroline pressed it to her chest. Because this was not abandonment. This was not indifference. This was fragility, human, breakable, real. And she She had believed the worst of him again. She was already moving. "Mrs. Gladys," she called. "Watch Henry." "Where are you?" "I must go." The hospital smelled of cold stone and antiseptic. Caroline did not slow. Not for stairs. Not for breath. Not for propriety. "Jonathan Croft," she said to the nurse. "Where is he?" "Third floor. He is very weak." She did not wait. He looked diminished. That was the first thing she saw. Not the Duke. Not the man who had once filled rooms with presence alone, but a man in a narrow bed, pale, exhausted, mortal. Caroline stepped closer, sat, and for the first time, she allowed herself to look at him without armor. Jonathan stirred. His eyes opened slowly. Confusion. Then recognition. "Caroline." His voice was rough, disbelieving. "I am here," she said. His fingers moved, searching. She took his hand. Without hesitation, without thought. Tears filled his eyes at once. "Henry?" he whispered. "He is well," she said. "He thought you had forgotten him." Pain crossed his face. Never. She believed him. That was the most dangerous part. "Why did you not send word?" she asked, voice unsteady. "I did not wish." He coughed, breath uneven. "To seem as though I was asking for sympathy." She stared at him. "You would rather I believed you abandoned him?" Silence. Then, "Yes." The honesty struck deep. Caroline shook her head, breath breaking. "You're an impossible man." "I know." "And a foolish one." "I know." And yet, her voice failed. Because she saw it now. Clearly, he had not returned for pride. He had not stayed for obligation. He had come, and remained, because he loved them. "I missed you," he said suddenly, as though the fever had stripped away his last restraint. The words hung there. Unprotected, I missed what I destroyed. Caroline's hand tightened around his. "You cannot say such things," she whispered. "Why?" "Because they matter." He looked at her. Really looked. "And you do not wish them to?" Her breath caught. "Because the truth was unbearable. I wished them 4 years ago," she said quietly. "And now?" Silence. Long. Shaking. Then, "I do not know if I can survive them again." Jonathan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. Steady, certain. "I will not leave again." "You cannot promise that." "I can." His voice did not waver. "Even if you never forgive me," he continued, "even if you never love me again, I will remain for him, for you. For as long as you allow me to stand near your life." Caroline felt something inside her give way. Not completely, not easily, but enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to hope. She reached up, slowly, carefully, and touched his face. The same face she had once memorized in candlelight. Now thinner, softer, real. "You are such an idiot," she whispered. A faint smile touched his lips. "I have been told so, and I should send you away." "Yes, and I should protect myself." "Yes, and yet—" Her voice broke. "I cannot forget you." The words fell between them. "Irreversible." Jonathan's breath caught. "Caroline." "I still love you," she said. Soft, terrified. "True." Silence. Then, Jonathan reached for her. Not with urgency, not with claim, but with reverence. As though she might vanish if he moved too quickly. She leaned into him. And for a moment, there was no past, no title, no exile, only two people who had lost everything and found each other again. He did not kiss her. Not yet. Some things required patience. Some things required proof. But he held her hand, and she let him. When she rose to leave, he did not ask her to stay. That, more than anything, convinced her he had changed. "Tell Henry," he said quietly, "that I will return." She paused at the door, looked back, and for the first time, she smiled. "Tell him yourself." Outside, the snow had begun again. Soft, endless. But this time, It did not feel like an ending. It felt like something beginning, and for the first time since the letter that had shattered her, Carolyn Hayes allowed herself to believe it was an again.